Dad left for Shanghai with his girlfriend. The background: midway through my senior year at college, my father got the privilege of opening the first plant in China when his company was granted permission. He was getting everything, and I mean everything: business class on airfare, a penthouse, recognition in the company for being effectively in charge of the project, mingling with higher-ups in the company, the works. This was exciting news for him because he was close to retirement, and it seemed that his hard work was finally paying off. My mom was happy because now, with my younger brothers starting college and me about to graduate, she and her husband of over 30 years could enjoy their empty nest. She loves us dearly, but she called my father her soulmate and wanted to spend their golden years together. However, things turned upside down in less than a year. Maybe the power went to his head. Maybe he was overwhelmed and stressed out with having to start a new life in a new country. Or maybe it brought out the ugliness that was already in his soul. I have no clue. I finished my senior year around Christmas time, only to see my father pack up his bags and leave us, saying he didn't want to be married to my mom anymore and was seeing someone else. To say the rug had been pulled out from under our feet was an understatement. It was like everything we'd ever known had imploded. My father left us shortly before Christmas, and we started putting the pieces back together. I started working 2 jobs and slipping money into my mom's wallet because I was terrified my father would cut off our money. It was during this time we started therapy, and all 3 of us came to the realization that this man had been emotionally, verbally, and financially abusing us for years. It's something I'm still trying to work through, and doubt I'll ever fully recover. For come springtime, my father had a change of heart. He contacted us and started making amends. Something in me was suspicious and held back, but I was happy because Mom was happy. She'd lost a lot of weight, was crying constantly, and was all in all miserable. He returned home for a 2-week vacation and then proposed a 3rd honeymoon, if you will. He and Mom would return to China to work things out. My brother and I were staying back home as we were both busy with work and school. Mom and Father left us with some important numbers to call in case of an emergency. The email address of my father's immediate supervisor, whom I'll call Stan, and weekly Skype sessions so we could stay in touch. Mom and Father left for China, and it seemed that everything would work out. 2 weeks later, it was time for our weekly Skype session. The first week had been fine, and my brother and I were expecting to hear another good report. Instead of that, Mom was alone, her eyes swollen, and her face red. I immediately went into Mama Bear mode and asked my mom in a voice that probably scared my brother and Mom, what happened? Mom, crying, tells us that after making the rounds with the higher-ups, my father had packed his bags, told her he was going to Shanghai for 2 weeks with his girlfriend, and then told Mom, I want you gone by the time I get back. Mom, floored by this, asked him how. My father said, I don't care how. Then he left my mother in the penthouse with little food. No clean water to drink. We've been warned to never drink the water in China because it was nasty, to say the least, and no way to navigate through a country where she didn't speak the language or get away home. She said, I think he was using me to look good at work. Everyone was saying they were glad we were working out our problems. When I heard that, my fury boiled. I am fiercely protective of my family and friends. You can do whatever you want to me, but make any of my family members or friends cry, and you'll learn why it's a bad idea to pick on them. As much as I wanted to fly over to China, track down my father and his mistress, and make them feel every ounce of pain that my mother was feeling, I knew that wasn't a smart or practical idea. Instead, I'd have to embarrass him so everyone knew what a scumbag he is. And an idea came to mind. The plan? After getting the information I needed from Mom and calming her down, I worked on the first part of my plan, bringing Mom home. I didn't have any money, nor did I have a visa to visit. However, I did have Stan's email. Using the skills I honed from my creative writing and general business studies, I wrote a lengthy email to Stan, crying over the keyboard as I drafted it. I explained who I was, what was going on, and that I was worried for Mom. I asked him to please help me find a way to reach my mom and bring her home. I promised him that I would repay every penny, even if it took the rest of my life. I added my personal email and phone number as a finishing touch and asked him to contact me if he had any other questions. After making sure it was perfect, a key lesson from my creative writing professor: make sure your writing is razor sharp. I sent it off along with a prayer that it would work. Stan never did return my email, but 24 hours later, Mom was safely home. I learned that Stan had gotten in contact with my mom within an hour of me sending the email, verified everything that had happened, and gotten her home on the first flight. I sent him another email, thanking him for helping us and told him I would repay the expense when I could. That time, he did respond and said, "It's all right. Thank you, though." That was the extent of our conversation, but I'm still very grateful to him for helping Mom. Out of his own pocket, if I'm not mistaken. He's earned my respect, and I hope wherever he is, he's doing well. When Mom got home, it sunk in for us that the marriage was truly over, and we made plans to move on. They were divorced within a year, and we moved to Florida for a fresh start, maybe a few years later. Mom found the new love of her life, who I call my stepdad, is working her dream job, something that never would have happened under my father, and is happier than I've seen her in a long time. My brother and I both are making our way in the world and finding ourselves after spending our lives as our father's perfect children. As time passed, I actually forgot about the email. Until recently, when Mom and I were talking about Stan, and she revealed what had happened. The aftermath. I was just hoping to humiliate my father. Instead, my email launched massive legal and financial headaches for my father. Right after helping my mom get home, Stan decided that my father's behavior was worrying. Because if he's using his wife to hide the fact he has a mistress, what else is he hiding? And started an investigation into my father. What he learned was mind-blowing. Not only was his mistress one of his subordinates, which is strictly against company rules for reasons I can't remember, but he had another mistress on the side, both of whom he was flying with expensive gifts and vacations, to name a few. But that wasn't the topper. What was the evidence that my father might have been embezzling money from the company during his time in China. However, for reasons that I don't know, criminal charges were out of the question. Instead, what they did to him, my father no doubt thinks, was even worse. My father was immediately demoted and sent home. His name was removed from the factory he had built, and his mistress is fired. Now, with this company, most of the promotions come not from what you know, but who you know. And since Stan knows many people, eventually, my father was forced to retire early before they fired him. He decided he had been discriminated against and tried to sue the company for unlawful termination. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he lost. Now he's disgraced, hated by nearly everyone, and with limited contact with his family and friends. He's still convinced that he's an innocent victim, and that time will prove him right, but everyone knows the truth. All I have to say about this one is Stan is the man. It's a plane, no, it's a bird. I had my Class 4 license, which is required to drive those 24-passenger shuttle buses. I looked like a young, fun-loving guy because I was. I pulled up to a group of people that were flagging me down. This happens when guests see me, but they aren't at a stop. No worries, I pull over. I open the door, and Karen looks right at me with that open-mouthed gasp that is so signature of Karen's. "Well, you're most certainly not old enough to be driving this bus." We kind of just stared at each other through the open door. I didn't know what to say. Someone else pushed past her and said, "Looks fine to me," and sat down. She stood there in the door and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the hotel to make sure that you should be driving." All the other guests on the bus sigh. She wasn't finished finding the phone number when someone on the sidewalk outside said, "Wow, look, an eagle." She stepped off the bus for a second to get a look. I closed the door and left her there. Next bus is in an hour. I don't know if there even was an eagle. I've come to submit a ticket. I worked for an IT company a while back and needed to do a return on a faulty computer component. My tickets would be constantly closed as complete from the vendor with no information given. We realized they used the same ticketing system as us due to a loop created by auto responses back and forth from both systems. We stopped the issue on our side and said, "Oh, well, that's good to know." After a few weeks and over 50 tickets, I was no closer to a resolution. My strategy at that time was spamming them with tickets, as they were very easy to create in our system. I tried calling. I'd leave voicemails, but messages stated that all returns are done via their online ticketing system. Okay. I sent my tickets to every department several times a day after getting no response from the returns department or my voicemails. Clearly, the tickets could be closed just as easily on their end with no care or repercussion. Then I realized I had the answer all along. I asked my boss to remove the new rules he had implemented to stop the loop of responses. He set another rule to basically auto-clear the responses right after it's received, and we've already auto-responded. This was to ensure that it doesn't crash the ticketing system since it was generating a response every few seconds. And I was gonna do this on 5 tickets. These responses also generate an email being sent back and forth. That should make for several hundred emails per minute. Better yet, I'm fairly certain images were getting relayed with each response. On an older or poorly set up system, that's a whole lot of traffic and data coming in. Even worse if no one there knows what's happening or how to stop it. Many companies don't have an IT department due to overall need. They outsource to companies like mine to fulfill those needs. It took less than an hour. We received a frantic call from the vendor asking us to stop the auto responses from our system because they didn't know how. It had basically taken down their email server because it was full and no one knew how to fix it. Oh, sorry about that. I'm glad you called, though. I wasn't sure anyone worked at your company because I've been trying to contact you for weeks. We didn't notice a problem on our end, but we can see what's going on now. Must be a different setup. Weird. I had a credit for the part before we ended the call. I hung up the phone victorious, called the boss and told him to put the rollback in. We never bought from them again.